Thank you so much for joining us. Now, the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria and the Civil Society Organization Initiative Against Human Rights Abuse and Torture have in separate letters to President Bola Tinubu asked him not to implement the additional $10,000 expatriate employment levy recently announced by the federal government. According to them, the imposition of the EEL, as it's called, will mark an unwarranted and unprecedented addition to the cost of doing business in Nigeria, especially in the manufacturing sector, and most likely to discourage investors from investing in the country. They argue that the EEL contradicts Nigeria's international trade agreements and the obligations contained therein. They also expressed concern that the levy will be collected by a foreign company and the money to be paid into the private company's account instead of the federal government of Nigeria's account. Meanwhile, several groups have been kicking against the federal government's decision. Some say paying the levy into a private company's account instead of that of the federal government of Nigeria's account amounts to economic sabotage. Let's listen to one of the groups.
Nigeria as a nation is the worst economy one can do business at this period. Everybody is managing himself, and they are not giving the expatriate burden without considering the negative effect. What are the negative effects? One is going to create more unemployment. Two is going to create more hardship. Three is going to cause a lot of bilateral issue in the bilateral agreement we have with other countries. Now, where do those expatriates came from? Four, it will make our cost of production to come down, because an expatriate that will ask that he should be paying $12,000 as a levy is going to increase the products he's producing in the country.
Sorry, we'll just have to bring in our analyst for tonight right now, Professor Adeniyi, to help us understand some of the issues actually being raised by the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria. Thank you so much, Prof, for joining us. I mean, you would have heard some of the things before we had that technology glitch. Actually, on some of the challenges that they have. I mean, the manufacturers are crying out. We've also seen some within the expatriate community saying that this looks like punishment, like, he had said.
Well, I think what I think government will need to do is to provide more information for people. Because if you look at it very clearly, especially stakeholders that like Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, because if you look at the policy critically, it's a salutary one, considering that it's a creative way of generating revenue. You know, when expatriates come into this country, they come on the basis of quota, and after paying for the quota, they pay about $1,000 to $2,000, you know, to get for each expatriate worker. They come in and start working, and beyond that payment, there's no other payment that they make apart from the personal income tax that you and I pay. You know, which makes the atmosphere, the environment, much very, very conducive. And against that background, you find out that, you know, quite a number of them often overshoot their quota, and they do it illegally, you know, because our control system, regulatory mechanism is very weak. Many of them abuse it. And of course, we have more than 200,000 expatriate workers working in this country. You know, with this kind of levy now, it's not necessarily punitive, I beg, with due respect to the chairman, not necessarily punitive, but a regulatory mechanism, you know, to control, you know, not just the influx of expatriates. Some of them are people whose job can be done by the average Nigerian person. If you look around in the industry, you see technicians, you see supermarkets, you see hospitality businesses, you know, all kinds of businesses being occupied by expatriates. And if you're looking at a situation where if you have this kind of regulation, this kind of monetary regulation, you know, close to $1.5 billion to $2 billion can be raised every year. I think the concern sometimes is how we're going to use this money at the end of the day. You know, that will be another discussion, you know. But the important thing is that we should not sleep on our rights in a situation where we have some other countries, you know, imposing this kind of levy. Japan does it, Singapore does it, Saudi Arabia does it, Yemen, and many other countries, they do it. And these countries that we're talking about are countries that are smaller than us in terms of population, and they try to control. So if they are small and they are still trying to control, then why should we deny ourselves that opportunity, despite our size and our burgeoning youth population, many of them unemployed, and where we can create opportunities for them to get employed, if we discourage the importation of expatriates who come to do jobs that Nigerians can do because of our weak control system, right? Now we're talking about a situation where people pay only, for their, for their quota. Then, of course, nothing else apart from the income tax. And remember again that this payment, from what I've read in the handbook, it's not the individual expatriate worker that will make the payment, but their employers.
Yeah.
Now,
the employers.
If you go to the United Kingdom, you'll imagine the amount of tax you pay, amount of levy, obligation, commitment you make to the government. You pay television license, you pay council tax, you pay road tax, all kinds of taxes. And of course, in that kind of country, there's not going to be a problem. You may not necessarily complain because you see the result of the payments you are making.
Yeah.
Perhaps the clamor, the advocacy we should be making is for the judicious use of this potential income when it begins to come in, not for it to be circumvented or diverted. That's what I think the concern should be, with due respect to those who are objecting to it. And I also think that there's no proper, education yet, on the philosophy behind it. And from the information we have, yes.
The cost actually, moving from $1,000 to $2,000 that you talked about previously to $10,000 for ordinary expatriates, and then for those who are directors, $15,000 US. That's what people are saying.
No, I'm not sure of the amount, if the amount has been fixed. Do not forget,
that's
have you read it anywhere?
Fixed, yeah.
I'm not sure. I've not read it.
$10,000 for
I don't know how much
any expatriate. But if you're a director in a company, it's $15,000.
No, I've not read this anyway. But what I know is that the much I know is that you pay, to bring in people as expatriates, and after the payment, nothing else apart from the tax. And when you are paying this tax, do not forget, to the best of my knowledge, except I'm mistaken, personal income tax go to government, state government, right? Nothing else apart from the initial payment goes to the federal government. And we're talking about a levy now, some kind of obligation that will be going to federal government. Most of the time they evade this personal income tax because the average expatriates, especially those in mining, construction, are often moving from one state to the other. And by the time they move from one state to the other, it's very easy for them to evade tax. And of course, we're just sleeping on our rights. And if you look at it critically again, many of them, I heard the chairman Senate Committee on Interior saying the other day that our country is the only country where you have prisoners being brought to come and work. Prisoners in some countries being brought into this country to come and work. And it's because of the weak system, the weak control system. So we are taking for granted, we've been taking for granted for too long a time. And if we want to impose some regulations, which is not necessarily punitive, it's just saying that you pay some levy. And of course, in the interest of our country, if we want to be sincere, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. If you are genuinely productive, you genuinely want to contribute to the system, remembering that you also need the system that you want to make profit from, that you want to profit from to survive. And how will it survive if it does not generate income? And of course, from generating income, if properly used, of course, you can talk about infrastructural development. We're talking about a country that's infrastructurally, I beg your pardon, deficient, needing about 30 trillion in the next 30 years, to be able to meet our infrastructural needs. And what that tells us is that we need income. Our major income source is oil, and of course it's fluctuating, very volatile. So many things happening around it. We're talking of diversification into agriculture, solid minerals, steel development, mining, etc., etc. But those are long-term measures. What about, why can't we think about short-term measures, soft measures, in the manner in which I will put this expatriate levy? I think we just have to be courageous about it and accept it as one more move that we need to take as a people.
Groups in the organized private sector are saying that, look, if other countries also decide to reciprocate this sort of action, it will be counting against us because we have a large diaspora community in other countries. So we should take a look at how we could actually fix it in a way that it's not so scary to some of these foreign investors, because there are skills that Nigerians actually don't have and all of that that they help to bridge. But if you're increasing up to $15,000 for a director of a company and then $10,000 for any other category. They said that's where they have problems with. The increase is just too high.
Now you're talking about, for some reason, the nomenclature in the circumstance is levy, not tax, right?
Yeah.
For some reason, I don't know,
it's a
but
levy,
the nomenclature is levy,
yeah.
Where money is also involved, I agree. But I'm talking about retaliation. This is an economic policy, which is simply administrative, and we see it happening. Ask the average Nigerian living abroad, how much obligation they have to government, and they dare not evade, those obligations. We will know the consequences of tax evasion or avoidance in some of these countries, because they are fundamental to income generation for every nation, because resources are supposed to be, those resources are eventually plowed into development sectors, that are helpful to the overall good of the people, and of course, not just in the present, but in the future. Nobody jokes with it when government is concerned about raising money. So I don't think that, and I cited the example of countries that are already operating it, and look at them, many of them prospering. Singapore is a good example. Japan is there. What about Saudi Arabia? 3 prosperous countries that are doing well, and they have this variant of levy system. So what's the problem if we're not thinking about it in Nigeria? And I mean, it's taken quite 4 or 5 years for these things to gestate. Government, I'm aware, has been thinking up from what we have read, has been thinking about it, and it's just that now it's coming into fruition. 4 or 5 years is not a joke. Spanning about 2-3 administrations, so I don't know. I think we just need to come to a common understanding, perhaps through more information, so that we can all be on the same page.
All right. Well, just to let our viewers know that what they've been paying before is through what's called SEPAC, and this SEPAC,
SEPAC, I'm aware,
$2,000,
2001 to 2000,
$1,000 to $2,000. But now let's talk about how the manufacturers, for example, are saying that this is going to add to the burden of business in the country, that the cost of doing business is already too high. And they understand that President Tinubu is trying to look for more money, he's trying to create more job opportunities for Nigerians, but of course you have to do it in such a way that you balance the situation, but that this situation will not lead to the ease of doing business in Nigeria, and investors will just dry away.
No, I don't think so. Every business, every engagement comes with some responsibility. And if it is properly done, if the implementation is peak and span, what it just means is that it should rather give confidence to the average investor, because you will imagine that you have paid your SEPAC, you have paid your levy, you are paying your tax.
They say it will add to the cost of doing business in Nigeria. That's their major concern.
Yeah, doing business is not cheap. Over the years, they've been doing this business, and of course, some of them they've been profiteering, right? They've been making profit, prospering, and of course, at the end of the day, when they make profit, what happens to it? They are exported, adding to the pressure on foreign exchange. But in a situation where there could be some subtle move to discourage them from unbridled importation of so-called expatriates, many of the skills that they do, that we can replicate here, that we have people who are competent to do it, and if we have our own people, our own locals being brought in to do this job, if they start looking inwards, and not feel that they are discouraged, if they are concerned about the progress of this country, development of this country, if they are genuinely concerned about it, they should look inwards. They will find competent hands that can replace the expatriates. So there's no reason to be discouraged if the commitment is there, really. And of course, we have to be concerned about ourselves as well. Look at the number of unemployed in the country, and it is increasing. So why should we be afraid of measures, that can help us reduce this?
When I saw it myself, at the face value of it, I thought it was a good policy, but until I started receiving these complaints and all of that.
Have you not seen local employers, business people also interested, maybe because to some extent of our neo-colonial thinking pattern, with due respect, that they are concerned about, bringing in foreigners to do jobs that the average citizen can do.
Yeah, because they say they are more skillful or trustworthy at times and all of that.
Yeah, it's a disservice to the system, really. And if you continue, if you do not check this pattern, it will just continue to underdevelop us rather than doing the opposite.
All right, Prof, I'll just ask you to hold on. From the letter written to President Tinubu by the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, there are 2 critical points that they pointed here, and I'm reading verbatim here. They said, we are concerned that the EEL, that's the expatriate levy, contradicts our international trade agreements and the obligations therein. For instance, Nigeria is a signatory to the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, and this contradicts it. That's one. And the second one, they say, Your Excellency, this rather punitive levy is already being perceived as a punishment imposed on investors for daring to invest in Nigeria and indigenous companies for employing needed foreign nationals.
For the second question, the second I've answered is about punishment.
Yes.
It's not punitive at all. We're just trying to stop sleeping on our rights, to cash in on the opportunities available to us, just like some other countries have done it. But with the AFTA agreement, yes, International Free Trade Agreement, African Agreement, for you to also work, you need to have your house properly in order. It's not to say that, yes, there's an international agreement, multilateral, bilateral agreement, but it doesn't mean that as a nation, sovereignty still matters, An international discourse in international relation, national interest is a priority. You do not say because of a multilateral agreement, international agreement, that you compromise your national interest. It's a priority. And of course, for international agreement to function, local national interest has to be top-notch, speak and span. So that you can collaborate properly, with global partners, as the case could be. I'm familiar with tax system in most countries. I know of this levy system as well in some other countries, and I'm afraid, if those countries are courageous enough to do it, why not Nigeria? We are in unusual times, and of course we should not, for any reason, sleep on our rights. Even though we are respectful of the cooperation, the support some of these foreign countries are giving to us.
All right, Prof, and we'll now go on a short break. When we come back, we'll continue the conversation here on the expatriate levy that has been announced by the federal government, which is causing an uproar, especially within the organized private sector. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're still watching Arise Primetime, and I'm Somna Sambu. Well, to help us explore the remaining angles to this story, I'm now being joined in the studio by the policy strategist, political commentator and group CEO of the Global Investment and Trade Company, Yusuf, and also the current affairs analyst and professor of communications at Bane University in Abuja, who's also a Rise analyst, Professor Adeniyi, is still with us right here. And earlier on, we were having a conversation with Segun Ajayi Kader, who is actually the Director General and CEO of the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, an elite group of manufacturers within Nigeria. And of course, we couldn't continue the conversation due to a technological glitch. Well, I will now be turning over to you, Baba Yusuf, to help us understand this expatriate levy from your own perspective. What do you make of it? The manufacturers are really asking President Tinubu to discontinue it. I mean, that's exactly what they said in their letter, that Your Excellency, we urge you to give due consideration to the above and direct that the implementation of the expatriate employment levy be discontinued. They are very emphatic on that.
Thank you very much for having me, Sumna. You see, the situation we found ourselves is a reflection of what some of us have been saying from a strategic perspective, from a policy and political developmental perspective. The bane of our progress as a nation is what I consistently talk about: policy incoherence and lack of proper policy coordination. Albeit the intention may be good, but where you have consistently, and with this I'm not just talking about the current administration, it has been the bane of even previous administration, government agencies and entities working at cross purposes to the detriment of the country. Now, first of all, let me refer us to a very germane section of this 1999 Constitution as amended, Section 59. It says that Section 59 requires that any imposition or tax, duty, fee, or levy must be backed by an act of the National Assembly.
Yeah,
okay?
I was almost coming to that.
Levies that are imposed without complying with the provision of the Section 59 of the Constitution offends the Constitution and are illegal. Now, this should be the foundation of our conversation, all right? What sort of homework was put in place by the in this case, maybe Ministry of Interior or whatever agency of government, in trying to bring about these policies, for example? And how have they been able to coordinate talking about interagency collaboration to ensure that they are not bringing a policy that will be at cross purpose with other subsisting policies, either within the realm of their own entity or in other entities. Okay, that is, first of all, constitutionally. Secondly, from a policy coherence perspective. I read the letter written by the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria. It's a very brilliant letter, very robust, and speaking to the issues. Because President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has one big selling point since he came to this, into this administration. Nobody can take it away from him. He has invested a lot of time and a lot of money going out to try to bring foreign direct investments. A chunk of his time has been spent on doing that. Now here we are with a policy that may negate that. What am I saying? From an investment and strategy and investment perspective, this is part of, we do that every other day. You see, an investor will not just come to your country unless he or she does due diligence. The conversations Mr. President will have bilateral conversations, and all the comforting words we saw Mr. President talking about, if somebody asks for bribe, tell us and all that. Those are what I call part of the marketing game for Mr. President to ensure he comforts them to come. But they will do their due diligence. And from a risk assessment perspective, if you do SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, what comes always all the time, either in private or public sector, in case of Africa and developing nations, is threat is always inconsistent policies. This always comes.
All right,
if in this case,
playing out here,
and at the end of the day, let us not forget, this is not only going to impact on the foreigners or foreign businesses. What Manufacturers Association of Nigeria is saying, which I align with, is the local businesses have strategic partnership with these foreigners to come in. And like also rightly mentioned, the leap from $2,000 to $10,000 to $15 also
to $15,000
is based on what yardstick, given the current economic realities, global and domestic, that we are facing. How do you intend to trigger or trigger a counter to our inflation? By bringing out policies that may countermand that at the end of the day.
All right. Well, very strong submission you've got there. But, Prof, here you were emphasizing the fact that this could also be a way to lead to job creation for Nigerians, because some of these companies actually know that we have the capacity, the skills. But also, he has raised a point. Wouldn't that negate what the president is doing? He's asking foreign investors to come into the country, but again, he's raising this levy from $2,000 to $10,000 and $15,000. We hear that some companies are already thinking of exiting Nigeria. So how do we have a win-win situation?
Well, first, I'm not sure that if we have a strong economy, a system that works better than it is now, that to discourage anyone from coming. If we have the resources, for instance, the fact that we have plenty of taxes in the United Kingdom, United States, I'm not sure it will discourage anybody from investing in those places, because you can predict the system, and predictability is dependent on regulatory mechanism, control system, and the effectivity of these elements that we have identified. Very, very important. So if we grow our system to be very, very predictable, I don't think that people in considering business opportunities, you look at opportunity, you look at the possibility for return on your investment. If the system is predictable and there can be hope for good return on investment, I'm not sure that people will be thinking about what they are going to be encountering in terms of levies, as the case could be. But you raised a point that is very, very interesting to me, the constitutional aspect.
That's where I also wanted you to go to.
Can I just chip in something on that? Well, I'm not going to, I may not have, what I think is that from what we have read in the media, and particularly in the handbook that was shared, there were several interagency collaboration. The Infrastructure Concession Regulatory Commission, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Interior, and of course the Nigerian Immigration Service, service, they were involved, in the production of this policy. I want to believe, it's going to be preposterous and really dangerous if they didn't get their acts right, in terms of the legal mechanism, and thinking that they could circumvent the Constitution, by bringing about this policy. I want to believe that they will.
And having the National Assembly
and one last point, Sumner. There's also an idea about administrative mechanism. Sometimes policies can be implemented based on administrative decision. That is one. Then two, it is also possible, that the possibility or the chances for Nigeria Immigration Service, which is under Ministry of Interior, which is going to be responsible for the implementation of this policy, will have some allowance, for this kind of administrative decision. But it's still something that we'll have to hear from the Ministry of Interior to be sure about, really.
All right, so Baba Yusuf, from the letter that the manufacturers wrote, they actually said that Nigeria may actually be defaulting on some of the international agreements, like the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. I had asked him that question, but I want to hear from your own perspective. Have we violated any international law while trying to bring this?
That is the worrisome aspect of it, and that is why I can understand Prof's situation, because I'm also at lost. This provision of the AFTA, Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement, is very clear. And we are signatories to this, international treaty or whatever you are talking about. Now, let's dimension this from two perspectives. One, strategic, and two, economic. From a strategic perspective, this is having some diplomatic dimension. What am I saying? You and I know about reciprocal diplomacy. Now, when you are signatory to these international treaties and you bring this, policy, as it were, that will impact on foreigners. In this context, we are looking at foreigners probably intercontinental, but we have intracontinental foreigners, our African brothers and sisters, and the provision of AFTA and indeed ECOWAS, not just AFTA, provides for free flow of goods, services, and people, right, across borders without this kind of encumbrances. The spirit behind setting up an AFTA, for example, is actually to break down the trade barriers. And if you do that, the immediate possible or potential ripple and concomitant effect is that, for example, the Francophone countries will react. And then what you will see is that they will come with their own internal policies that will now give our own brothers and sisters that are applying their trade or working in those areas.
Yeah, about 70 million Nigerians are in the diaspora.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then from an economic perspective as well, now we need to speak to ourselves, have absolute respect for Mr. President and his team, and we know they have all the good intention to make Nigeria better. Like I said, it's a Bane. It's not just situated with this administration. We really need to sit back and have direct and peripheral vision on our policy coordination and policy coherence initiatives. You see, for example, we are trying, Mr. President is struggling so hard to trigger, business and trade. And you are still having within the same administration, counterproductive policies. Within 2 months, for example, from January to February 14, from January 1st to February 14, the CBN adjusted the import duty rate 5 times. Sumna, 5 times. And you know what it means for the import rate on our businesses.
Of course.
So now, if you have that was done 5 times within 2 months, and you now come with this policy again in March, for example, these are all adding up to the cost of doing business, if reflecting negatively on the ease of doing business. All right, Olam's Foods, I think, is the latest company that has suspended operations. In the last 2 weeks, they suspended purchase of sorghum and corn due to high escalating cost of doing business, for example. Now, that is why, as far as I'm concerned, in this particular instance, lest I forget, we have the Local Content Act, Sumna, and we have the Immigration Act, within which there are provisions to protect our people and their skills and competencies.
Yeah, and that's where I'm coming to, because Prof had alluded to that. Look, President Tinubu is also doing this to create more jobs for Nigerians.
Absolutely.
Because foreigners are coming to the country and taking jobs that we could ordinarily do.
Yes.
So if we can do it in such a way that Nigerians get job opportunities, it could help boost the economy.
Absolutely.
But if a foreign entity, that has invested in Nigeria is desirous of getting someone outside of the country to bring in, despite the fact that we have local content, then they should pay for it.
Yes.
And then we'll generate money.
Yeah.
And then that Nigerian who could have got that job and is unemployed could actually have those monies, created, maybe creating an investment for him or her in another sector. What do you think of the job creation aspect of it, and including providing monies to the government?
Okay, I will answer from two perspectives. First of all, the job creation, the focus on job creation, the chunk of our employment rate, if you look at the larger percentage of it, is with regards to a particular, bandwidth of our youth, mostly fresh entries, lower and middle cadre staff that require those skills and competencies to be honed. So the question is, within the Local Contact Act, have our requisite agencies ensured that the subsisting entities are actually impacting and adding value to our citizens, to make sure they have built those capacities?
Well, now, they said there's an abuse here. That even prisoners have been brought into Nigeria sometimes.
You see, now that is now. So now you cannot
because of the abuse, yes, because of the lower figure of $2,000 that was being paid.
So why
before
should our agencies, the regulatory agencies, not do their jobs? Somna, this is not a function. You don't create problem to solve a problem. Somna, we have people that are vested with those responsibilities, and it is because of corruption. Let's not hide it, that we got to this. We have worked in organizations, we are running our own organizations, and we know, and even with this 20,000, 10,000, if we don't fight corruption, it's going to be the same thing. But let's come back to job creation, which is very key. I agree with you, but guess what will happen? We will go that route, but the same entities, the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria that have strategic partners with foreigners, the foreigners that have come into play, will now look at this from a cost perspective. And operationally, at the end of the day, this cost will end up being passed to who? The consumers. Who are the consumers? Nigerians. So while we should look at the critical pillars of job creation, I don't believe, with all due respect, increasing this expatriate quota levy is supposed to be a big win or a focal point for us with regards to creating job opportunities for about 40 to 50 million Nigerians. Right. We need to look at the production sector, and we need to also see how we can allow good businesses to practice properly in this country and start seeing how regulatory agencies are put on their toes. But I believe increasing layers and layers of cost and encumbrances will negate the mission of Mr. President to bring in investment. And at the end of the day, it is only when you have organizations and like a Manufacturers Association of Nigeria that jobs will be created anyway.
Yeah, in very large volumes. Well, as we try to round off this conversation, Prof, one of the prayers here by the manufacturers is that they are asking President Tinubu to direct the Nigerian Immigration Service to refrain from enforcing compliance with the policy while their letter is receiving gracious attention by President Tinubu. Do we hope to see this anytime soon?
I don't hope for the president.
I'm just saying that from your own perspective.
It depends on
do
what
you think that the president can actually stop it? Because when they launched it last week, everybody would seem to be happy in government that look, President Tinubu is trying to protect Nigerians
but one
from foreigners.
Bear in mind is that it didn't start from the gestation of the policy, right? It didn't start from the Tinubu administration. It started from about 3 administrations ago. I think from President Jonathan also. And of course, processes were on, interagency collaborations were on, from what we have read, until it got to this level. It just happened to transpire that, it is being signed, being implemented in the Tinubu administration. Okay. But there's something I want us to remember that, laws are never static, laws are often changed, based on new realities. And sometimes when you have similar laws and you think there are deficiencies in those laws, it's not, there's nothing wrong, when you try to bring about another kind of regulation, probably to improve on previous laws or even on existing one. It does happen. Then again, on to the question of after is fine, but if you look at the volume of expatriates we have in Nigeria, You know, how many of them are actually from fellow African countries? We know where the source countries are, you know. So Africa may not necessarily be detached, irrespective of the fact that, you know, the fact that we have a transcontinental agreement does not mean that you shouldn't tidy up your own local environment to make those multilateral agreements to function fine, as the case could be Sumner.
And Baba Yusuf, if you were to actually give a figure that the federal government should review this down to, what figure will you give? I mean, between $2,000 to $15,000, which is the highest, which would you feel? Although that's $15,000 is if you're a director, but the one for average expatriates coming to Nigeria is $10,000. Yes. So what will you review it down to, or even maybe higher to?
Well, I'm of the view that definitely there's need to inch it up, because if you go back and look at when that 2000 was pegged, it's a lot of years ago, a lot of dynamics have come into play. So naturally, we should inch it. But like I told you, we should also consider other factors in play, like the 5 times you increase custom duties, you know, rating, 5 times within 2 months. So you factor all these things to look at how it will impact on cost of doing business, because at the end of the day, it will end up with our citizens. So if, for example, you inch it without prejudice, because I'm not aware of all the parameters they used, you know, to raise this bar, but without prejudice, I was expecting something to inch towards maybe halfway there, maybe 5,000 or whatever. Maybe also these numbers may be in anticipation of a pushback, and as a negotiation tactic, maybe they may end up inching backward.
By the government.
Most likely. I hope that is the case, you know, because it could be that from a strategic point, fly the kite and then we come back and then we inch it back. But that being said, we should be progressing as a nation, Sumna. If we have for example, I will still wait to hear feedback on this constitutional provision, which to me is unambiguous. That being said, I also agree that there are administrative fiats with regards to some, you know, ways and means for you to do this. Even if we are doing that, we should have, like I said, peripheral vision on some of these things, so that it will not come back and bite us. Olams is leaving Nigeria. They are all leaving. Now, there are 3 things that ensure business continuity or investor continuity or economic continuity. One is investor acquisition, which means the president is doing, you know, very, very, you know, in a bullish way. Secondly, which is more critical than investor acquisition, Somna, is investor retention. If you don't retain the investors, because investors come with a 25-year, 20-year plan, and you come in with distortions that at the end of the day will impact. It will impact on our citizens who are already cringing under the vagaries of this. Don't forget, Mr. President, from day one, started this administration audaciously. So I will say dear, because, you know, from one to another, okay, and then, so, you know, we should wait and see how some of these things are sinking in before we bring in, because, you know, from a strategic perspective, we are handcuffing ourselves to a situation whereby we are not able to sort out things before we go into some other things. All
right, and to you, Prof, if we are to reduce this based on all these complaints, what would you be advising the government to do?
Well, first of all, I think that the administration should be mindful of making a difference in terms of transparency and accountability. You know, we are having, you know, a groundswell of distrust, your misunderstanding of this policy, but because people are concerned that once again, even when the revenues come, they will be misappropriated or misapplied. That has been a bane, and that's why people can hardly trust the system. You know, that's why doubts, you know, are being cast on the policy, as the case could be. But if you look at it fundamentally, whether you increase or reduce it, there's nothing wrong in policy changes like this. You know, and of course, getting the National Assembly to.
But if there's an upheaval, I mean, people, those who are in the sector, organized private sector, are shouting. I mean, shouldn't the government think
you see, you do not expect everybody to be on the same page with you in a plural system like this, where we have people in different sectors. 225. I beg your pardon. What's the population again?
Over 200
million people. You know, you do not expect everybody to be on the same page with you. There's no policy, no matter how salutary, that everybody will sing hallelujah over. And
yeah, but I will ask you to hold on there, Prof, because I'm reading the letter now by the manufacturers. Yes. They actually blame the government for not consulting. This is it. They say, Your Excellency, it is extremely important that we intentionally institutionalize stakeholders, consultations, and engagement before important policies that could have far-reaching implications for economy are made.
That's
So that means there was not enough stakeholders consultation.
You see, it could actually be the problem, that there was no stakeholder. That's why people are complaining. And NECA too has also complained, but we haven't heard from NSC, we haven't heard from TUC. But from what I know about this country, even when you do stakeholder engagement, right, you still see dissent. You still see people raising arguments, on the productivity or the viability of the policy. And that's why the onus is back on government to ensure efficiency and the efficient use of the resources. So at the end of the day, people who naysayers now will sing hallelujah in the future or will applaud the government, for thinking about the policy in the first instance.
I'm afraid we don't have enough time, but in 30 seconds, how soon do you think President Tinubu should review this demand by the manufacturers and others in the organized private sector?
I think Mr. President will be very swift with this. If we look at his antecedents since he came into office, he's a listening president. He's a very sensing president. So I think by the time he comes back, he will get more perspectives like the issues they have raised.
He's already back.
Sorry, he will look at it now from looking at it from that perspective. The Manufacturers Association of Nigeria is a critical stakeholder, and using this opportunity to say they should continue engaging, the government should continue engaging stakeholders, not just in this instance. The more you do that, the less you have this kind of gray areas that come out and embarrass government at the end of the day.
All right, that's the perspective you actually see. It's embarrassing government because, these people in the organized private sector, including the employers and the manufacturers and all of that, are saying that, look, there should be a review of this employers,
which is an avoidable
levy.
thing.
Yeah, but we must thank you so much, Yusuf, for helping us to understand this. And we hope that the government listens. And of course, our own Professor Adeniyi. The debate continues until President Tinubu takes a decision. Yeah, but of course, we really enjoyed your contributions. And of course, earlier on, we had Segun Ajayi Kader, who is the DG and CEO of the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, joining us virtually to help us understand some of the issues raised in their letter to President Bola Tinubu. And of course, other groups are coming for the government too on this imposition of a levy of $10,000 for average expatriate quota, and of course $15,000 for directors. And of course, we just hope that the government will be able to listen to all this. Well, that's how it's been for this edition of Arise Primetime. Do join us again tomorrow from me and the entire team here in Abuja. Goodbye and thank you for watching. I'm Somna Sambo.